Hi, fourth grade, Miss Jen here. Welcome to Chapter 3 of A Long Walk to Water. Please follow along as I read the chapter to you and answer the comprehension questions at the end of this video. Take notes on the two discussion questions that you will be talking about with your classmates and teacher in your morning meeting, and complete 2 written responses in full sentences and details. Also, feel free to join the community board. All right, let's get started. Our vocabulary for this chapter: smudge, a blurred or smeared mark on the surface of something. So for example, if you have a mirror and maybe there's a dirty spot on it, that could be a smudge. Sludge, thick, soft, wet mud, or a mixture of liquid and solid components. So this could be, during rainy season, if you're walking through a mucky area or in a trail or maybe to the beach and it is like a gross sort of muddy substance. Gourd, a fleshy, typically large fruit with hard skin, some varieties of which are edible, which means you can eat them. They can be dried and used to carry water. So you'll notice here the gourds on the right-hand side, which could be used for decorations, but then you'll also notice there are a bunch of these here as well in Mexico. They're dried fruit and they're used to carry different types of water or juice. Flinch or flinched, the past tense, make a quick nervous movement as an instinctive reaction to fear, pain, or surprise. So you don't mean to do it, it's an instinct, right? You flinch. Pond, a small body of still water that is not moving, formed naturally or by hollowing or embanking. So it could be human-made or it could be formed naturally, like in this picture below. Dimmer, of a light, color, or illuminated object, not shining brightly or clearly. So maybe I had a bright shining light and I dimmed it down. Those lights that can go brighter and not as bright, or you could think of, maybe festive holiday lights. All right, here's our timeline. Remember, Selva 1985, Nayat 2008. Chapter 3, Southern Sudan, 2008. The smudge on the horizon gained color as Naya drew nearer, changing from hazy gray to olive green. The dirt under her feet turned to mud, then sludge, until at last she was ankle deep in water. There was always so much life around the pond. Other people, mostly women and girls, who had come to fill their own containers. Many kinds of birds, all flap and twitter and caw. Herds of cattle that had been brought to the good grazing by the young boys who looked after them. Naya took the hollowed gourd that was tied to the handle of the plastic container. She untied it, scooped up the brown, muddy water, and drank. It took 2 gourdfuls before she felt a little cooler inside. Naya filled the container all the way to the top. Then she tied the gourd back in place and took the padded cloth donut from her pocket. The donut went on her head first, followed by the heavy container of water, which she would hold in place with one hand. With the water balanced on her head and her foot still sore, let me move this, her foot still sore from the thorn, Naya knew that going home would take longer than coming had. She might reach home by noon if all went well. Southern Sudan, 1985. The tears were hot in Selva's eyes. Where had everyone gone? Why had they left without waking him? He knew the answer, because he was a child who might tire easily and slow them down, and complain about being hungry and cause trouble somehow. I would not have been any trouble. I would not have complained. What will I do now? Selva took a few steps to see what he could see. On the far horizon, the sky was hazy from the smoke of the bombs. About 100 paces in front of him, he could see a small pond. Between the pond and the barn was a house, and yes, a woman sitting in the sun. Holding his breath, he crept closer until he could see her face clearly. The ritual scar patterns on her forehead were familiar. They were Dinka patterns, which meant that she was from the same tribe as Selva. Selva let out his breath in relief. He was glad that she was not Nuer. The Nuer and the Dinka had a long history of trouble. No one, it seemed, was sure where the Newer land ended and Dinka land began. So each tribe tried to lay claim to the areas richest in water. Over the years, there had been many battles, large and small, between Dinka and Nur. Many people on both sides had been killed. This was not the same as the war that was going on now between the rebels and the government. The Dinka and the Nur had been fighting each other for hundreds of years. The woman looked up and saw him. Selva flinched at her glance. Would she be friendly to a stranger? Would she be angry with him for spending the night in her barn? The woman might do. Oh, I think we lost something there at the bottom. The woman might do or say to him. He walked toward her. Good morning, Auntie, he said, his voice trembling. She nodded at him. She was old, much older than Selva's mother. He kept quiet, waiting for her to speak. You must be hungry, she said. She stood and went into the house. A few moments later, she came back out and gave him 2 handfuls of raw peanuts. Then she sat down again. Thank you, Auntie. Squatting on his haunches next to her, Selva shelled the nuts and ate them. He chewed every nut into a paste before he swallowed, trying to make each one last as long as he could. The woman sat without speaking until he was finished. Then she asked, Where are your people? Selva opened his mouth to speak, but his eyes filled with tears again, and he could not answer. She frowned. Are you an orphan? He shook his head quickly. For a moment, he felt almost angry. He was not an orphan. He had a father and a mother. He had a family. I was at school. I ran away from the fighting. I do not know where my family is. She nodded. A bad thing, this war. What are you going to do? How will you find them? Selva had no answer. He had hoped that the woman might have some answers for him. After all, she was an adult. Instead, she only had questions. Selva stayed in the woman's barn again that night. He began to make a plan. Maybe I can stay here until the fighting stops. Then I will go back to my village and find my family. He worked hard, so she would not send him away. For 3 days, he fetched firewood from the bush and water from the pond. But the pond was drying up. Each day it was harder to fill the gourds. During the daytime, Selva could hear the distant booming of artillery from the fighting a few miles away. With every shell that exploded, he would think of his family, hoping they were safe, wondering desperately when he would be with them again. On the 4th day, the old woman told him that she was leaving. You've seen that pond is only a puddle now. Winter is coming, and the dry season. And this fighting. She nodded her head in the direction of the noise. I will go to a different village near water. You cannot stay with me any longer. Selva stared at her as panic rose inside him. Why can't I go with her? The woman spoke again before he could ask aloud. The soldiers will leave me alone, an old woman on her own. It would be more dangerous for me to travel with you. She shook her head sympathetically. I'm sorry I cannot help you anymore, she said. Wherever it is you walk, just be sure to walk away from the fighting. Selva stumbled back to the barn. What will I do? Where will I go? The words repeated themselves 1,000 times in his head. It was so strange. He had known the old woman only for a few days, but now he could not. Oh, he could not imagine what he would do when she was gone. He sat inside the barn and stared out, looking at nothing. As the light grew dimmer, the noises of evening began. The buzz of insects, the rustling of dry leaves, and another sound? Voices? Selva turned his head toward the sound. Yes, it was voices. Some people were walking toward the house, a small group, fewer than a dozen. As they approached, Selva took a sharp breath. In the fading light, he could see the faces of those nearest him. 2 of the men had patterns of V-shaped scars on their foreheads. Dinka patterns again, the kind that were given to the boys in Selva's village as part of the ritual of becoming a man. These people were Dinka too. Could his family be among them? All right. Please answer the question. In the Ed puzzle, why will it take Naya longer to walk home? 2, why did the others leave Selva? 3, how can Selva recognize who is in the Dinka tribe? 4, why is the old woman leaving? 5, why won't the old woman take Selva with her? All right, so here you're going to add in the vocabulary smudge, sludge, gourd, flinched, pond, and dimmer into these sentences. So the power at our house went out for a couple of hours. When it came back on, the light seemed. When I was brushing my teeth, I noticed on the mirror. Before heading up the mountain, I filled in order to stay hydrated. A fly buzzed around his head as he was sleeping. He silently. My mom told me to stay out of it wasn't fit for swimming. After the storm, we trekked through and finally arrived at the beach. All right, discussion question. In this chapter, Selva meets a woman he calls Auntie. Describe the relationship that Selva has with the old woman. All right, here you can take your notes in the bullet points. Why does Selva trust the old woman? Why does she help him? Why won't she take him with her? All right, so you can use those guiding questions for your notes. We will be discussing this, or you will be discussing this with your teacher and your classmates, so be ready to share. All right, also let's look at this passage, and your notes will go on the right-hand side, thinking about why have the Noor and Dinka tribes been at battle? So reread this passage here. We just read it, and let us know why you think the Noor and Dinka tribes have been at battle or in conflict. And here's your written response. What has Selva learned about his life so far in the story? So here you can use everything from chapters 1 through 3 of what you think Selva has learned. A lot has happened in such a short time. So make sure to use evidence from the text and use your best fourth grade writing, full sentences, paragraphs, and punctuation, and spell check. Next question. What type of person is Selva? Why do you think that? Use your notes and what you learned in our discussion in the morning meeting to answer the question. Use at least 3 complete sentences. Use evidence from the text and make sure it is your best fourth grade writing. All right, your community share link, your teacher has shared that with you, and we will discuss that in the morning meeting. Great job, fourth grade. Keep rocking.